Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this meeting tonight on behalf of the commissioners and the staff. Government is at its best when people participate. We appreciate you being here to participate tonight. Let's have our call to order. So done. Let's have our roll call. Raise your right hand, please. Everybody answered? All right, and this time, Tom, will you and Charles take care of the invocation and pledge? Stand, please.
Almighty and merciful Father, we humbly beseech Thee to watch over us as we do the people's business this afternoon. Please guide us with your invisible hands so we may find your favor in the decisions that we reach. Please bless us with your grace through Jesus Christ, our only mediator and advocate. Amen.
Please face the flag and remain standing. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any corrections to the agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I'd
Mr. Webb,
like to
then we'll go back to the motion. Did you want to sum it? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just under presentations to rotate 2 and 3, just because of the presentations, just to keep everything a little more smooth.
Now let's have a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Just one other item. The name under recognition of Eagle Scout says Nathan Giles. It should be Nathan Lewis Carrolls, and we'll recognize him when he comes forward.
Anything else before?
Mr. Chairman, if the Eagle Scouts are here, could we go ahead and do that before we do the public hearings? Because the public hearings sometimes can drag on.
Did everybody hear Tom's request?
It's fine with me.
All right. Jimmy, can you correct that with your motion?
I make the motion to approve the agenda with those additions and corrections.
Now, second.
Second.
All in favor indicate by raising your right hand. Thank you. All right. Which one we're moving up, Mr. Manager?
Eagle Scout recognition.
Sir.
Eagle Scout recognition.
All right. Will Mr. Webb assist you in that? I've got a little knee problem.
Pitt County, if Nathan Lewis Carrolls will come forward with any parents, family members, Scoutmaster, anybody you have here with you. Mr. Carrolls is a Boy Scout in the Boy Scouts of America in the Pitt County chapter, and he has earned the rank of Eagle Scout. And we're here to recognize him in this achievement. Would you like me to read the certificate? Certificate of appreciation is awarded to Nathan Lewis Carrolls for achieving the Eagle Scout Award. For his project, he built several large octagon picnic tables for Covenant Church. This is presented by the Pitt County Board of Commissioners on this 18th day of December 2017, signed by our chairman, Mark W. Owens, presented by our vice chairman, Mr. Glenn Webb.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Would you like to say something, son?
No, sir.
Wait just a minute. We're not going to let you go yet. Do we have a motion for approval of this?
So moved.
All in favor, raise your right hand. Thank you, sir.
Congratulations.
Scott, why don't you go ahead and do Melvin while you and Glenn are down there?
Okay.
Do we have a motion on Mr. McLawhorn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor indicate by raising your right hand.
He's coming. Tonight we have a beautifully framed resolution to honor former Chairman Melvin McLawhorn and Vice Chairman Webb. You like me to read this?
Good.
It's entitled Office of the Pitt County Board of Commissioners, Resolution of Appreciation Honoring Melvin McLawhorn as Chairman. Whereas Melvin McLawhorn has served faithfully and honorably as Chairman of the Pitt County Board of Commissioners from December 2016 to December 2017. Whereas Chairman McLawhorn provided the Board of Commissioners with steadfast leadership and commitment as Chairman. And whereas the Board of Commissioners expresses their appreciation to Melvin McLawhorn for his guidance, organization, leadership skills, and commitment to service during his tenure as Chairman. And whereas Chairman McLawhorn's represented the county at various at various county board and ribbon cuttings, meetings, and special events, such as Pitt County's designation by the American Planning Association as the 2017 Great Places in America that was held at the County Home Complex. And whereas, under Chairman McLawhorn's leadership, Pitt County instituted the Community Paramedicine Pilot Program in partnership with Vidant Health. And whereas, under Chairman McLawhorn's leadership, Pitt County expanded the Leroy James Farmers Market in partnership with Perkins Wells and West Trust Fund. Whereas, under Chairman McLawhorn's leadership, Pitt County began the implementation of the CDBG, which is the Community Development Block Grant Infrastructure Sanitary Sewer Improvements to the Candlewick Area Sanitary District. And whereas, under Chairman McLawhorn's leadership, Pitt County realized substantial progress on several capital projects, including Pitt County's industrial shell building, enhancements to the emergency communications radio and paging system, the Woodmore subdivision road improvements, the backup 911 PSAP center, the solid waste and recycling C&D recycling facility. Now therefore it be resolved, the members of the Pitt County Board of Commissioners commend Melvin McLawhorn for his efficient leadership and outstanding service as chairman of the board for the calendar year 2017. This adopted this 18th day of 2017, signed by our chairman, Mark W. Owens, and attested by our clerk, Kimberly W. Hines. Mr. Webb.
Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You can have the floor if you want to say anything.
I want to thank everybody, and especially commissioners and the staff for working with me during this time. It's been enjoyable, and it's been a pleasure to serve the citizens of Pitt County. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McLawhorn. Greg, I believe you're next.
We can load that where I can.
Move the mic closer.
I do have a brief PowerPoint with a few slides showing the history of the Bookmobile
Who can
service.
help him with that?
Can they? I don't know if we can run it that quickly. We're actually celebrating 70 years of Bookmobile service in Pitt County. And also rolling out a brand new Bookmobile, which we just had the ribbon cutting a few minutes ago. And I was going to share with you, almost there. Thanks. It's going to show Bookmobile photos. Here we go. Thanks for your patience. Okay, there we go. So can we run that as a slideshow? First one. There we go. Great. Thanks. There we go. So here's the brand new Pitt County Bookmobile we're just rolling out. Now, how do I advance those? Is it going to be this? Sorry. Arrow. There we go. So 1947 Bookmobile. We still haven't been able to identify that young man, but Bookmobile service has been very, so if anyone knows, let me know. Contact me afterward. Bookmobile service has been tremendously important in getting library service to people who couldn't get to one of the library locations. Shepherd Memorial Library started operation in October of 1930, but we've had Bookmobile service since 1947. And the Pitt County government has been the primary funder of bookmobiles when we needed to replace one. So they might last 15 to 20 years. They look a little different as time goes by, as you see. At one time, we had two bookmobiles at once, because before the branches were expanded, before the main library was expanded, because you just couldn't get enough bookmobile service, enough books to the people of Pitt County without more than one bus. It was so important that key people in education knew. The gentleman in the center is D.H. Conley, and the gentleman on my right there is J.H. Rose, Junius Rose. So Conley was superintendent of the Pitt County schools, and Rose was it's on automatic, was the superintendent of the Greenville City schools before the systems were merged. They both served on the Shepherd Memorial Library Board of Trustees. They knew the value of reading, getting the books out to kids and seniors, and so I thought that's a great historic photo. The lady on the left was library director Elizabeth Copeland, who served from 1954 to 1981. And so the bookmobiles would last as long as they could. Pitt County would help to replace one. And the bus here on the right is the 1998 bookmobile. The engine blew on that unit in May. Okay, we got as much life out of it as we can, almost 20 years. When that bus was replaced, there were still federal grants to help make up some of the funding. So Pitt County provided the lion's share of the funding. There was a federal Library Services and Construction Act grant to help make up the difference. In 2000, those grants switched over to technology when public libraries became really important for public computers. People have access to computers and internet. So when the brand new bookmobile came along, the need for one was there, and it had been in the works. Pitt County, again, paid the lion's share, but we also had our Friends of the Shepherd Memorial Library pitch in funds. They have those 2 book sales per year and sort donated books all year long. We had the local Perkins Trust, that's the James J. and Mamie Richardson Perkins Trust, gave us a grant to help replace the bookmobile. And we had a loyal library patron, Sarah Elizabeth Olshner, who donated funds back in the 70s and that we kept safe for a rainy day. Rainy day came, we put those funds toward the new bookmobile. So there it is, purchased debt-free for the people of Pitt County just in time for Christmas and ready to run a 20-year career. The old bookmobile, the 98 bookmobile, circulated 300,000 books, slightly more than 300,000 books across its 2 decades of service, went 100,000 miles all over Pitt County, from Fountain to Calico, Bethel to Aden and Grifton, and all points in between. We expect the new bookmobile to do the same. It's got tremendous upgrades, and 20 years later in technology, so backing cameras and sonar, it can't run over anything or anyone. Not that the old bookmobiles did, but it's just much safer. There are 2,000 books on board. The bookmobile is going to be going out next week, or this week actually, starting its 3-week schedule. You'll have, we say we serve people from start to finish or cradle to grave. The bookmobile especially is a huge impact for children and seniors. When it pulls up to a senior center and the ladies come out dressed to the nines to go on the book and browse for books, it really is something to see. Or it goes to touch a truck or a school after school to sign up kids for library cards. It just will provide tremendous service. There still are, in 2017 and beyond, lots of people who don't get to a library facility. This bus also has tremendous technology, cell signal booster, where it's just like it was a hardwired facility for internet connectivity and everything. So we can check people out in real time and everything else. It's the best of what a bookmobile can be. It's actually 2 feet shorter on the outside and 4 feet longer on the inside. That may sound strange. The drivers now sit over the engine. So inside you have longer shelving, but it's shorter and more maneuverable, safer, better. It can get in all the nooks and crannies of Pitt County. I just really thank you all for your faithful support of bookmobile service and library service in Pitt County. I promise you the new bookmobile will have tremendous positive impact for our citizens, and Merry Christmas. I can answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for your presentation, and we want to give thanks to all of our library people in the county and the cities. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chairman, what'd you do with the old bookmobile?
Well, as I say, the engine blew up, and the suspension's like a trampoline. So if you go over one of the little roads with a single lane bridge out in the county, they almost put it in the swamp a couple of times. It's so bouncy, but it'll end up being sold on Gov Deals. So
I mean, the exterior looks good.
on the old one.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little closer, it doesn't look as great, but that.
When you sell it, just take a long distance picture.
Right, and so, I mean, if somebody buys it, it's a great value, yes, but it couldn't continue in service. It really, if just the engine repair alone would have been prohibitively expensive, and it can't provide the kind of service. And the generator that provides electricity for the computers and everything, and lights and everything else was so loud. When you were on board, you really couldn't hear yourself think. The new bus, it has a whisper quiet.
You don't need
generator.
to be saying anything else about it because the potential purchaser may be listening.
Right, understood. A great value, gently used. There you are. Okay. But
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you all
Come
very
back
much.
and see us. All right, Mr. Rhodes, I believe we're going to do number 1 under the next, and we do have people that have signed up, but as we get to the particular area that you want to speak, we'll call you at that time. Yes, sir, Mr. Rhodes.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. We have several public hearings from the planning office tonight. The first couple deal with changes brought on by legislative changes in the last legislation or legislative session with the state this past year, and so we are first going to deal with the subdivision ordinance. And one of the very first items is the definition of a subdivision, and this is critical to the planning office when we're trying to determine if landowners, if they're dividing property, whether it necessitates going through a subdivision review process. And with that, one of the items that we had some language in there previously, we've got, I'll say, more substantial language now, especially if someone passes away that owns property and through the execution of the will, that is not subject to our requirements. So therefore, it would be exempted and would not have to be reviewed through the regular standards. The other item is that another part of the definition of a subdivision, and this gets into a very peculiar situation, and I'll try to break it down with all the language that's on the screen right now. Basically, it allows subdivisions which start out with a lot between 5 and 10 acres that's not divided into more than 3 lots and hasn't been divided in 10 years, and it meets all the zoning requirements and it has ingress and egress requirements met as well. You get to skip past the preliminary plat stage and go to the final plat stage. So the next 2 items that you'll see on the screen makes accommodations for those changes to that definition. Again, that particular situation would be exempted from the preliminary plat review process for minor subdivisions. You'd skip straight forward to a final plat review, and that would shorten the process for those particular land divisions. The last item that's part of these revisions is just some old technology. We no longer have personal computers. Mr. Taylor has upgraded our systems enough that we no longer accept floppy disks. So we're taking that out, and as one of my young staff members said, he didn't even know what one was. So that's coming out just to clarify that language. And with that, Mr. Chair, those are the items for consideration for amending the subdivision ordinance, and we're ready for the public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. I'll now open the public hearing. Do we have anyone signed up to this particular issue, Mr. Manager?
No, sir, unless there's somebody in the audience.
If not, I close the public hearing. What's the pleasure of the board?
Motion to approve, Mr. Chairman.
Second it.
All in favor indicate by raising your right hand. So ordered. All right, Mr. Rhodes.
Okay, also some legislative changes necessitate the change and amendments to our zoning ordinance. The first one deals with swine farms. You may recall in county zoning requirements, bona fide farming operations are exempted, except for one thing, and those were the large-scale swine operations. Well, with the new legislative changes, even those are now exempted too. So we've changed language to accommodate those amendments. In fact, removed language when we talk about in our commentary, swine farms. Again, we do not single that out as one of the items that we can regulate. They are now exempted from our zoning requirements as well. And there are several things. Our table of permitted uses also needs to reflect this. You'll see under RA, we did allow it as a conditional use previously. It is now exempted. That's what the E stands for. The other thing that we're also bringing up for your consideration isn't part of legislative changes necessarily, but something that we've run across in our discussions with the board dealing with mining operations. And I've got a map to show you in a minute that'll kind of put all this into a little bit better frame. What this does is allow the separation requirement. Remember, we've got a 100-foot buffer around the perimeter of we'll say a sand mine in this case. What has happened, our current regulations say that should be based off the property line, not the mining permit or the site plan that comes on. And that gets somewhat cumbersome when we have a situation like this. 2 parcels, if we, under the same ownership, if the owner wanted to have this permit to include both these parcels. The way it currently reads, it would require a 100-foot buffer from even the internal lot line here. So what we're recommending is we need to drop back to the mining permit or the site plan that's submitted as part of the zoning requirements. And this would, again, around the perimeter would require the 100 feet, but not along the internal property line. So this really helps with anytime there's several parcels that are pieced together for a mining operation. This removes any confusion there. And these are the things that would change in some of the development standards. This deals with the swine farm. We're removing all of that. And another definition. And with these, just like with our regular map changes, these are amendments to the zoning ordinance, and we have to speak to the consistency of these changes, and planning staff believes that they are consistent with our regular regulatory program that's currently in place, and that it is reasonable in the public's best interest as well. And it does also bring us in compliance with the legislation that was adopted earlier this year. Planning Board has reviewed this item and also recommends approval. And we have two recommended motions: adopt the consistency statement and approve the amendments and update our ordinance book. And with that, Mr. Chairman, we're ready for the public hearing.
All right. Having heard that, I declare the public hearing open. Mr. Manager, do we have anyone signed up for that?
Again, no, unless there's somebody in the audience.
If not, then I declare the public hearing closed. Do we have a motion to approve the two items outlined here?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
I'll second the
Let's
motion.
get the motion and then we'll have discussion.
I seconded it.
Got a motion made and seconded. Now discussion, Tom.
Does this allow swine farms to be placed, I'm going to say, easier throughout the county and possibly becoming a nuisance to neighborhoods? Is that potential of it?
I would say probably not. It is another step. In that respect, it would make it easier, but I will say the state requirements are very cumbersome. They're also very restrictive, and at this point, I'm not sure that another one is going to be permitted anytime soon in Pitt County, regardless of whether we changed it in our zoning ordinance.
Thank you.
Ready to vote? All in favor indicate by raising your right hand. All opposed? So ordered. All right, number 4.
Eric will be up to deal with the two map amendments that are proposed.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. We do have 2 rezoning requests tonight. This is the first of the 2. It's by Angela Libreros. The property is about almost 5.5 acres on the western side of NC 11 north, east of its intersection with NC 30, or actually, I'm sorry, south of its intersection with NC 30, requesting to go from heavy commercial conditional district, which allowed previously forestry equipment sales and service, to general commercial is the requested zone. So just as a little history, the property has been rezoned twice since 2007. The first was in 2007. It was rezoned from rural agricultural to general commercial. Then in November of 2014, it was rezoned from general commercial to the heavy commercial district to allow that forestry equipment sales and service use. That use has since gone out of business, where it's vacated the property. So the people that own it would like to rent it, and so they would like to drop back to the general commercial, which again was the previous zoning district. This is the location of the property on NC 11. See, it's just south of Bethel, the ETJ for the town, as well as NC 30. There is an existing commercial building on the property. The comprehensive land use plan designates it as rural residential agricultural. You can see it is just south of a commercial node there along the NC 30 intersection. This designation is intended to include low-density residential, agriculture, forestry, churches, limited commercial, office, and public institutional uses that meet locational criteria. And that criteria includes frontage and access to a major state highway or secondary road, location at a major intersection, proximity to similar uses, and spatial separation from non-compatible uses such as existing residential. I see the land use plan, or the existing land use map. The property is currently designated as commercial because of the building and the previous uses that are on the lot. There is one residential property across the street, but for the most part, it's agricultural and undeveloped land around it. The county zoning map you see is predominantly rural agricultural around it with the current zoning of heavy commercial. That district is intended to include a range of retail and service uses, moderate density multifamily in those areas that have access to major thoroughfares and the utilities to support that development. Staff does find the request is consistent with the land use plan, given its location along a major thoroughfare, its proximity to the commercial land use category, and its proximity to an existing commercial land use, and that is there's a solar developer that's located at the intersection of NC 30. Staff also finds the request is reasonable and in the public interest because of the existing commercial building located on the property and the separation between this and the non-compatible residential land uses. So staff does recommend approval. The planning board reviewed this request on November 15th and voted unanimously to recommend approval and to advise it is consistent with the land use plan. And with that, Mr. Chair, I would like to open the public hearing.
All right, sir. Declare the public hearing open. Do we have anyone signed up for that?
No, sir.
All right, that having been said, what's the pleasure of the board? We've got two motions, one to adopt the consistency statement and one to adopt the recommendation for the approval.
Motion to approve both motions, Mr. Chairman.
Mary?
I have a question.
Well,
I'll second it.
Now a discussion, Mary. Thank you.
There is a new residence just south of that property. How, have you talked with the residents there?
No, ma'am, we haven't talked. We did send out notices to all property owners within 500 feet of the property, though. And there's been a sign posted since before the planning board meeting. So if they were within 500 feet, they should have received a notice.
Because it wasn't on your map. That's what I was looking for. There's a new residence just south of that property.
Okay. If there is, we probably just didn't pick it up on our land use map just yet. So, but like I said, if they are within 500 feet, they should have received notice. But we haven't received any calls from anybody within that area about it.
I don't know how far it is, but it's not a great distance.
Have I marked some out? What's next? All right, we've had a motion made and seconded. If no further discussion, let's vote. All in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed, so ordered. All right, next one, Mr. Manager.
Next is number 4, Gary Jackson, conditional district rezoning. And Mr. Gooby, I think, is going to do that one too.
Yes, sir. Thank you. The request is by Gary Jackson to rezone 1.78 acres. It's located on the western side of NC 43 South. This is south of Hollywood Crossroads, from rural residential to general commercial conditional district, and that's to operate a general contractor business. This is the site. You see it's located just south of Hollywood Crossroads, right there at Mills and Worthington Road, where they intersect with NC 43. You'll see it's just south of D.H. Conley High School. Land use plan designates it as suburban residential, and it is also just south of a commercial crossroad community right there at the crossroads. This designation is intended to include residential land uses as well as limited multifamily, commercial, office, and light industrial and public institutional uses. Non-residential uses also have to meet the same kind of locational criteria as the previous request: frontage and access to a major state highway or secondary road, proximity to similar uses, and spatial separation from non-compatible uses. Existing land use shows it is predominantly residential with some scattered commercial land uses throughout that area. You also see the large blue, that is D.H. Conley. The green is just south of D.H. Conley is the soccer complex. And the zoning map you see there is several properties are zoned commercial currently, particularly at the crossroads. There's also one across the street from this property, as well as some further south. Again, the general commercial district is intended to accommodate a range of retail, service, office, limited wholesale uses in those areas that have access to utilities for that development. And the conditional zoning district allows the approval of a specific use with reasonable conditions to ensure it's compatible with the use and enjoyment of neighboring properties. And again, this proposed use is a general contractor business. The zoning ordinance does also have special development standards for contractors. One is it's required to have a use separation of 50 feet from any property line, as well as 100 feet minimum from any residence. Dust has to be maintained on the property. And then there's also restrictions on the level of noise that can be produced by equipment on the property. And then also any kind of outdoor storage area also has to be enclosed by a 6-foot tall security fence and screened with a buffer yard in accordance with our zoning regulations. This is a site plan that was presented. You see this is the boundary of the property. There's a 3,600 square foot building that's proposed primarily for storage, and then a 6-foot chain link enclosed area in the back for outside storage. They're also proposing some vegetation along the front and the rear and side property lines for that, to meet that requirement for the outdoor storage area. They're also proposing to construct the building with a pitched roof and vinyl siding to help with make it more compatible and to blend in with the neighboring properties. Staff does find it's consistent with the county land use plan, given its location along a major thoroughfare and its proximity to existing commercial land uses and zoned properties. We also find it's reasonable and in the public interest, again, because it is located on a major highway in proximity to several commercially zoned properties. Will be required to maintain the minimum separations from those adjacent residential properties. So staff does recommend approval, subject to those zoning requirements that I mentioned, as well as an additional condition that building should be constructed as it's proposed with the pitched roof and the vinyl siding so that it blends in with the surrounding properties. Planning Board reviewed the request on November 15th also and voted unanimously to recommend approval and also advise that it's consistent with the land use plan. And with that, Mr. Chair, we'd like to open up for public hearing.
Haven't heard that. Declare the public hearing open. Do we have anyone that wants to speak, Mr. Manager?
Yes, we have 2 people signed up. If Gary Jackson will come forward first, please. You can give us or Mike Baldwin on his behalf, either way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I'm Mike Baldwin, and I represent Gary Jackson. Gary signed up, and I'm kind of wondering why he asked me to go before him, because he did such a good job at the planning board. I'm afraid I'm going to get an invoice from him instead of me at the end of the deal. But,
Mike can short-circuit you.
That's right.
The board haven't heard the evidence and haven't closed the public hearing. Go ahead.
Well, Mr. Owens, I've always gone under the policy, if it doesn't need selling, don't sell it. But anyway, this does meet the locational criteria. Gary has done a fine job. He's gone out and met with the adjoining property owners. He's given y'all a drawing that y'all will hold fast on that. Your planning department and inspections department will ensure that. He's already put a sign up out there with nice stone landscaping blocks around it. Right now, he's going to just use it. His wife doesn't want me to tell this, but he's going to use it for his man cave.
You didn't say it was going to be a clubhouse.
No,
That's nowhere in here.
That's right. So, but he's going to have a boat in there. He's going to have some motorcycles and a few collectible cars. But he is going to store some things for his building and remodeling. Mostly, Gary does a lot of remodeling. He's been in the county for 28 years. He's been in business 25 years. You've probably seen his trucks, G&J, going around town. So with that said, if there's not any questions, I'll sit down. If there are, I'll be glad to answer them.
Thank you, sir. Who you got? Anybody else?
Just Mr. Jackson himself, if he chooses to come forward.
Mr. Jackson's not here.
He
Do you want
deferred.
to speak, Mr. Jackson, or?
No, I'm good.
All right. No further comments? If not, I declare the public hearing closed. Do we have a motion for
Move to approve.
1 and 2?
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? If not, indicate by raising your right hand. All opposed, so ordered. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Enjoy the man cave.
But his wife is here, she heard.
You ready?
Yes, sir. Road
All right,
name
Mr. Manager.
Next is the road name change, and I think Eli Johnson or James Rhodes. Eli's coming up to do this one.
Good evening. Today I brought before you a road name change, Davenport Farm Road.
Pull that down, and maybe it's just me, but
No, I think
Good evening.
can everybody hear okay?
No, I think you're right.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So the North Carolina Department of Transportation, through its contractor Barnhill Construction, is in the process of designing and construction of the NC-11 Southwest Bypass. And it's accompanied by the realignment of Davenport Farm Road. So due to the realignment, the road segment will be renamed, and the addresses will change for the structures located along this portion that we're getting ready to show you. To your left is a map of the full bypass that goes from Greenville all the way down on the south side of Ayton. To the right is the section we're talking about in red, where Davenport Farm is changed. This kind of zooms in a little bit tighter, and to the red is the one we're talking about where the road name is subject to be changed. The blue is the new realignment of Davenport Farm that has gone around the bypass and intersected Bell Arthur Road. So this is the new road that's gone around, and where it intersects Bell Arthur Road. Got a bridge that goes over the bypass. This is what it looks like now, where DOT has cut off the old section, and they're going to move it. And they've moved it down to Bell Arthur Road, and they've already included a stoplight at that intersection. They've introduced an intersection right here. This is where the old road is at, Davenport Farm, and they put in a stop sign and repaved this section. And this is looking down to the part that we're talking about to be renamed. And this is the dead end, so it just dead ends to the end where the bypass is coming through. And so we've notified all the property owners and asked them to submit a recommendation of a road name for that area. There are 12 parcels with 11 unique property owners and 7 homes that we affected. So after the submittal, we've received 5 road names, and before you is Cedar Smith Road, which is 1 word, Cedar Smith Road, 2 words, Crawford Farm, F&L Gray, and Macon Buck Road. And so our recommendation is, after having a public hearing, approve a new road name for that portion. And so what you have to do is hear before you any petitioners that would propose a road name. We don't have a recommendation on the road name, except those that we presented were approved that meet the guidelines for 911.
All right, so having heard that, I declare the public hearing open. Mr. Manager, do we have anyone desire to speak for this?
2 people. First person is Carl Crawford.
Mr. Crawford?
My name is Carl Crawford, and I'm representing our family. And we want the name changed to Crawford Farm Road. And we own the property on the left and right when you turn in. And that's been in our family over 120 years. And we own on the left and then on the right all the way down to Burna. So we would like it to be Crawford Farm Road.
All right, any questions of Mr. Crawford? Not, we thank you, Mr. Crawford. All right, well, who else you got?
Next, we have Betty Smith.
Ms. Smith?
It's called age. I'm Betty Smith, and my husband and I, Robert, own property on both sides of the old Davenport that we're talking about changing. Also property on each side of the new Davenport that comes out to 13. And my mother-in-law married into that family, and we live at the old home place that's over 100 years old. And we bought that property when it was sold to satisfy the heirs. And we love the farm, and our farm has been cut up and dissected by the bypass. Prior to the decision to run the bypass through our property, we were in preliminary planning for a subdivision called Cedar Smith. Now, of course, that's not possible where we had planned it, but we still have property off the old Davenport Road that we could use for a subdivision. Now, this bypass has impacted us pretty badly, probably worse than anybody else along this route. And I would like to have something to show that we've lived there, that we have put our lives and our finances into a place that's been cut up in pieces. And I'd just like for y'all to consider the name Cedar Smith, 1 word, for that road.
Any questions of Ms. Smith? The area that has been changing the names.
My grandson still lives at that dead end that you saw the picture that Eli showed
The Smiths and the Crawfords all own that most
It
of that
was
land, didn't it?
originally the Crawford, the matriarch, I'd say, of the family is where we live right now. My mother-in-law married into that family.
Any further questions?
I have a question.
You, Miss Ann?
I'm wondering, is it possible to name it both families? Is it possible to name it Cedar Crawford?
I don't sound right. It just don't.
That's a good overture, Ann. I was thinking that too.
I don't know. I wouldn't want it Cedar Crawford.
Crawford Cedar.
Smith Crawford, maybe. Smith Crawford might would work, but.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Smith,
Yeah,
Smith
you know,
Crawford. Yeah.
we'd be reasonable on that.
Smith Crawford.
Yeah.
Cedar Smith Crawford.
Yeah.
Smith Crawford instead of Cedar Smith is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, we've asked, you've been asked by, had you finished, Ann?
Yes, I'm finished.
You've been asked by one board member about a compromise, for lack of a better term. You responded to that. Does the Crawfords want to come back and be engaged in this? I think it'd be proper if you did.
He's had his turn, that's mine. I'm Patty Crawford Worthington.
Patty, step up to the mic.
Sorry.
And bring
Patty
it
Crawford
down.
Worthington. Okay. And we do own the property, the first part of where the new road is going through. We own both sides of that. And our cousin, Nanny Sue, owns property that adjoins ours. And at one point, there was Crawfords that owned land at the end of where Davenport Farm Road stops now. And then, as Betty said, the home place that they live in belonged to Crawfords. So the Crawfords really had a big impact on that whole area. And ours has been in the family since, I think, 1898 or something like that. Anyway, we would love to have it named Crawford Farm Road. Thank you.
Wait a minute. That's good. And compromise, of course, is I like the approach.
Yeah.
Because both families are well known in this county.
Yes.
Both families have been great contributors to this county. And of course, we'd like for both families to help us in making a decision. And I'm just one speaking about that. But is there any other member of the board that feels that way?
I think that is an excellent compromise, to name it Smith Crawford or Crawford Smith, whichever is preferred. But because that would include both
Cedar
names.
Smith Crawford.
Huh?
Cedar Smith Crawford.
Well, it doesn't have to be Cedar, because that's a separate name. That was the first name, but Smith is the last name and Crawford is the last name. So it would, that appears to me to be a great compromise. Now, she says she's okay with that. Are you okay with that?
Not really.
Okay.
If you want to know the truth, but I mean,
Okay.
that
All right.
is not my decision.
Appreciate your
to make.
opinion.
Thank you, Patty, and
Okay.
thank you, Ms. Smith.
Thank you. Thank you for your consideration.
What's the board's feeling?
Well, I'll tell you, Mr. Chairman, I looked at the negative impact that citizens have had as a result of this Southwest bypass. And if I look at a map of the Smith farm there, it was prior to the Southwest bypass in 2 pieces. And now it's in essence in 6 pieces. It has really been negatively impacted, and the scenic view that they once had has gone because they are now sitting right in the middle of a lot of traffic. So I was prepared to make a motion that we name this the Cedar Smith Road. However, trying to make everybody happy, I think the Smith Crawford is a good compromise. And I will make a motion that we do that.
I second.
All right, we've had a motion made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Webb?
Just before any vote's complete, you're probably going to need to figure out what that's going to look like, one word, hyphenated, or anything like that.
Thank you.
And I just remind you to close your public hearing before your vote.
All right. If there's no further participation from the audience, I close the public hearing. Now, back to discussion. We've had a motion been made and seconded. Beth, excuse me.
The English teacher in me may be coming out, but when I heard the Cedar Smith Road, it went Crawford Smith Farm Road. I kind of like that. Is that too much? I mean, do you have to get approval of this if we go this way?
I could review it, but more than likely it would already.
It would go since all of this has been
It
approved.
just has to meet less than 23 characters in length and not duplicate anything in the county, but I'm pretty sure that would meet the guidelines.
Well, could I make a substitute motion that we call it the
You can try, yes, ma'am.
Okay, please, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Crawford Smith Farm Road.
All right.
Is that 26 characters?
Is there a second to that? Substitute motion?
I second.
All right, any further discussion? Everybody understand the motion, the substitute motion? All in favor of the substitute motion, raise your right hand. Got the vote, madam? All right, that settles the issue, doesn't it?
Yes. One opposed? It's not 26.
No, I abstain.
Okay. I have a question, though.
Wait a minute, Mary.
You had one that didn't vote. I was just
All right.
clarifying whether it was an opposition or an abstain. And,
Have you got that issue settled?
yeah.
I'm good.
Okay. All right, now, Mary, what's your question?
Is it going to be a hyphen or a slash?
I think just like I said, I didn't say hyphen.
Well, you got two great names. It doesn't make any difference
No
whether it's hyphen
hyphen,
or
I
not.
don't think.
I was just wondering, and if, because nowadays you have hyphens to mean two families joined together, and if you have the slash, that means two individual families. And I've seen it both in Pitt County.
Madam Attorney, can you direct Miss Mary to answer her question?
Yes, the motion did not include a hyphen, so I would interpret the motion that was approved to not include any additional punctuation.
Okay. Any further issues on this? If not, let's go on, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Manager.
Mr. Chairman, next we have under presentation, item number 4, presentation of the county's audited financial statements for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2017. We have Cassie Wilson with our auditing firm, Martin Stearns & Associates, here to make the presentation before you. You also have a copy of the PowerPoint that will be shown on the screen in front of you as well.
Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Is this be a moment while he sets up the PowerPoint?
That was a good copy.
What's the name of it?
You're right. Have you ever really noticed some of the road names in Pitt County? I sure do wonder where some of them come from. Hyphens all
Does it make any difference if this had been sent?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I still not knowing what I'm doing?
It is through that.
It's there now.
Do we normally go ahead and approve it? All right, try your way. Go ahead, honey. I don't know where that's gonna work or not. Tell us what you want to tell us.
Okay.
We've got your.
You've got it. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, I'll try to do this to the best of my ability without them being able to see the numbers on the screen. We completed our audit of the financial statements for year ending June 30th, 2017.
Cassie, do you need a copy of this?
I have it.
Okay.
I'm good. We issued an unmodified opinion on the audited financial statements. we would like to take a moment to thank all the departments that were involved in the process and the cooperation of everyone. It takes a lot to complete the information and gather that, the resources that we need to complete and go through for DSS, for finance, and for various departments that received requests from us as well. So we would like to thank everyone for taking the time to issue, to get the financial statements issued on time. We have submitted to the LGC, and once we receive their approval, you'll get your final bound copies along with the letter from us for the responsibility letter. So we have, if you'll go to the slide that is the fund balance position for the general fund, that talks about the available fund balance. So the total fund balance for the general fund was $37,213,683. Once you take out the non-spendable and the stabilization by state statute amounts, the available fund balance was $27,698,706. That was a decrease from the prior year's available fund balance, a decrease of $2,655,001. And this is the calculation that the LGC uses when they're doing their comparisons and doing their data for across the state and comparing each unit of population size to one another. So this is something that is specifically a calculation that they set. This is how it has to be calculated. And just to note that the decrease, this is a reflection of the board's decision to spend fund balance when it was discussed in the prior year. So you did see a decrease as you had expected. The next chart, the available fund balance as a percent of the expenditures and transfers out of the general fund. For 2015, we had 22.10%. For 2016, it was 21.5%. And for 2017, that ended at 18.6%. And again, this is something that the LGC uses. This is their calculation on it, where they do a comparison. And so this is something that they utilize. This does not take into account other committed or assigned fund balance. So this is strictly just taking out the restricted amounts and the non-spendable amounts that they want in the calculation. The general fund summary. The revenues and expenditures both for 2017 increased. The revenues ended at, for the general fund, ended at $148,555,800. The expenditures ended at $140,815,655. So that was a revenue increase of about $6.4 million, and expenditure increased as well, about $6.7 million. So we'll talk about the revenues first. The revenues for the general fund. The pie chart there shows you the top 3 revenues broken out, and as well as the total of the remaining revenues. So the top 3 revenues totaled roughly 92% of all your revenues. These percentages are comparable to the prior year. There's less, about a 1% or less shift between each of the type of revenues that's made up there. And then I'll talk in detail about the top 3 revenues. So the ad valorem taxes, those ended at $85,251,700. That was an increase from the prior year. I believe you had a tax rate increase, and that is a reflection of that. Your other taxes and license ended at $21,097,775. That as well increased. A bulk of the increase in the other taxes and license usually comes from local option sales tax. And so, because that's a bulk of what makes up that category. So you did have an increase in there. Your restricted intergovernmental, that did increase as well. It ended at $31,120,560. that increase is subjective each year depending on what federal and state grants you get. That fluctuates every year. So your restricted intergovernmental is subject to federal and state grants that you apply for or don't apply for or that end each year. And then to discuss the expenditures, the top expenditures, education, human services, public safety, those pieces remained comparable, those percentages, to the prior year as well. The other expenditures that make up only 11% of the total expenditures include environmental protection, economic and physical development, culture and recreation. Those pieces come together and only make a small percentage of your total expenditure categories. For public safety, those ended at $33,856,656. That was an increase over the prior year as well. Human services ended at $46,210,880. That was an increase, and again, that is reflective of federal and state grants. Or human services is mostly funded by federal and state grants, so that is a reflection of that as well. And education, that ended at $45,008,966. This total does include public schools and community college as well. That does not include debt service for those, but it does specifically include both pieces of education that you fund. And that was an increase from the prior year. And some information we want to make you aware of and share with you looking forward. There is a new GASB standard that is affected by OPEB, or affects OPEB reporting, your other post-employment benefits. OPEB has been recorded previously as a percentage on the county's books in your government-wide, your first schedules of your financial statements. Going forward, this standard requires the full liability to be recorded. So across the state, everybody's going to see their liability recorded in their books change for OPEB. You have to have a new OPEB study completed, and the actuary has the details of the changes to meet standard requirements to put your full liability on. So their calculation process that they have went through, the types of calculations that they use is changing. They have certain requirements that have to be done. Before they had options that they could choose between when they were doing valuation of that, but some of that has changed now. So I can't tell you what the liability is going to increase to, but it is going to be significant, and it will be a restatement because it is a new standard being issued. So it will cause a restatement in your government-wide, and it will be a significant liability that's going to be added in there to get your full liability recorded for OPEB. Compliance is another area that's seeing significant changes for next year. The way that direct benefits are recorded in the schedule of expenditures of federal and state awards, a part of your compliance report, the way that that's been reported previously, the state has given us information and confirmations on direct benefits that are paid, and that has been reported in that schedule, and that has affected the major program determinations and the single audit testing for the county. And this is across the state. They are changing the direct benefits that are going to be reported on there, and there are significant ones for Medicaid, for example, that are no longer going to be a part of your schedule because it's already being reported at the state level. So they are taking these direct benefits off, which is going to reduce the amount that's reported on there for federal and state awards. So what that means is where we have before been able to test certain programs, and those are your typical programs that we test each year, that is changing to where we may have at a minimum, three additional programs is what we're looking at. So that changes the time and resources for us and for finance and for DSS. We don't know exactly what programs it's going to be that we're going to have to test yet, because we can only project and do a best estimate based on what your numbers ended with this year. But we are expecting there to be significant changes to that when they take the direct benefits off. It's going to impact the auditing procedures and the time that goes into that and what we ask of the county to provide us information on. So we want to make you aware of that, as well as the state auditor's office is bringing back the agreed upon procedures for compliance. So these agreed upon procedures are specifically for their purposes of single audit reporting at the state level. So they give us procedures. They tell us they have decided when they brought this back, before it was a matter of us getting the report still and making our own sample size. They're no longer doing that. They will give us the sample size that we are required to test per county, and we have to report that information to them. So they will tell us whether it's 100 cases or 300 cases, or who knows what they're going to tell, because at this point it's all still in the works and undecided. So we are still waiting on more information from them before we can share more about that. But these agreed upon procedures are a completely separate engagement that the state auditor is requiring. And so it will be separate of the audit, so it's a separate component. And the resources that we will need for that are in question as well. So until we get the list from them of this is specifically what we want you to test, and this is the number and sample size you will test with each county, it's going to be a while before we get to the point where we can share that information with you in more detail. But we want you to know that the LGC has sent out a memo on it, and they have shared that information that these changes are coming. So we want to make sure that you are aware of the changes that will be impacted for next year's audit.
Thank you, ma'am. Having reviewed the printed material we have about this audit, having received the oral presentation, and Mr. Elliott has reviewed this, our record shows, and Chris has reviewed our record shows. So what do you want to add to that, Scott?
Just want to add a comment that we'll be adding more discussion on this at your CIP budget planning workshop on January 22nd. But did just want to point to your attention that our projected fund balance for ending June 30th, 2017 was 19.61%, which was a calculation at a point in time. But as you recall, there were a number of major things going on when we adopted the fiscal year 16-17 budget. That was the year of reval. That is the year that we had a planned revenue reduction of Fed bed revenue by $1 million. That's the year that we had the major increases for law enforcement for pay increases. That is the year also we did an increase to pay off the GO bond, general revenue bond for PCC. That is also the year that we increased the Capital 1, 2, and 3 funding for Pitt County Schools and Pitt Community College. That was also the year that we took one-time cash expenditures to fund our backup 911 center. So just a number of factors there that drove that down. Obviously, in the current year we're standing in, you increased taxes by 1 penny to bring the rate up. And but we'll have more detailed on this when we come to you in the capital planning budget workshop on the 22nd. But just did want to let you know that what we had projected, that you've seen an acceleration of the fund balance. And we knew that when we appropriated $4 million back in the prior fiscal year, that this was going to happen. Obviously, in this year, that $4 million was reduced to 3 because there was a 1 cent tax increase to account for that. So just want to point that out.
If there's no further discussion, do we have a motion to approve this report?
So moved.
All right. All in favor indicate by raising your right hand. All opposed, like sign. Okay, we now have a resolution for appreciation of Ms. Booker. Mr. Elliott.
Okay. Vice Chairman Webb coming down for that, or do you want to do it?
No,
Move approval of it.
Do we have a motion to approve that resolution?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, raise your right hand. So order.
Friends, coworkers, whoever you would like to have join you up front here? Okay. Well, tonight we'd like to honor Kathy Booker for her years of service with Pitt County government. We have a framed resolution that we would like to read, and Mr. Webb, if you'd like me to proceed. Okay. Resolution honoring Catherine Booker for her years of service with Pitt County government. Whereas Catherine Booker was appointed tax administrator on December 1st, 2008. Whereas Catherine Booker has served the citizens of Pitt County for over 9 years and initially began her public sector career in tax administration on December 29th, 1997 in Surrey County here in North Carolina. Whereas Catherine's oversight tax administration has increased the collection rate from 96.8 in 2009 to over 99% in 2017. Whereas additional highlights during Catherine's tenure include making property record cards available on the web for the first time in Pitt County's history, installing Spatialist real property analytical software, began utilization of Comper for the appraiser software, and successfully completed 2 Pitt County revaluations in 2012 and 2016. Whereas Catherine served as the president of the North Carolina Tax Collectors Association from 2012 to 2013. She also served as president of the Coastal Plains Tax Association and president of the North Carolina Candidates Club. Whereas Catherine and tax administration has ensured the successful transition to the North Carolina DMV Division of Motor Vehicles Hagen tax system, resulting in increased motor vehicle collection rates here in Pitt County. Whereas in her tenure with Pitt County, Catherine has served on many committees such as the North Carolina Property Mappers Association Locations Committee, the North Carolina Tax Collectors Internet Committee, and the chairperson of the North Carolina Association of Assessing Officers Resolutions/Publications Committee. And whereas Catherine holds certifications as a county assessor, personal property appraiser, tax collector, and tax mapper. Be it now therefore resolved that the Pitt County Board of Commissioners does hereby express its gratitude and thanks to Catherine Booker for her career and dedicated and exemplary service to the people of Pitt County, and honors her with this resolution of appreciation given under our hands and seal of Pitt County this 18th day of December 2017, signed by the chairman, Mark W. Owens, and attested by the clerk, Kimberly W. Hines. Mr. Webb.
Congratulations. Thank you for service.
Say a few words? I'm grateful for the opportunity to work in Pitt County while my daughter was here at ECU, Brody School of Medicine. And I'm very appreciative of the staff for assuring that all my ideas and thoughts came to fruition, and I am very thankful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I thought you would have stayed long enough to get a collection rate up to 100%. But it's 99 points, you know what it is.
Yes.
But we're working for that right on, and thank you for your good work.
Yeah, thank you for that. Getting us there.
Thank you.
You did.
Okay, why don't you get next to her?
Get in there. Turn this thing around.
Turn
Yeah.
it around. Okay.
There you go. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, while you're getting back, I believe we are now to the public address to the board. Do you have any of that, Mr. Elliott?
Yes, I believe we have 2 people signed up.
If you will, call them around.
We have Mr. Charles Creedle. He'll come forward.
All
First,
right,
give
Mr.
his name and address.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'll keep your time at 3 minutes.
Hello again.
Hello.
Hey, Mr. Cradle.
Glad to
My
have
name
you.
is Charles Cradle. I live out on State and Mill Road at the railroad crossing, and I'm here again tonight to speak to you about a railroad problem we're still having. I'd like to say that there is less stopping between the houses than there has been. Sometimes they go in the yard. This is great, but they don't always go in the yard. And but that is better, and I'd like to thank Mr. Rhodes and Ms. Gallagher for their efforts, and I have seen after they got involved, I have seen a difference. We're fighting another problem now, and that's whistle noise. They've added a night shift yard engine, which starts out about 9 or 10 and switches most of the night. And of course it goes through the crossing, back and forth, back and forth. And a train engine's whistle is no joke. I don't know how many of you have been close to one when it goes off, but if you're trying to sleep, it's not a joke. You won't sleep. We have normal whistle blast along for 2 to 4 seconds and a short 1 to 2 seconds. And they'll usually come up and do 2 longs, a short, and a long. some of the crew guys are really good, and they're very considerate about our situation. Now, I really appreciate that. But there are others who are, it's like they got it in for us. And they'll come out there and hit 10 and 15-second blast with that train engine whistle. And there's no sleeping through it. And about the second time you get woke up at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, you can't go back to sleep. You're so mad you want to go out and do something else. So, but it's not all the crews, it's just some. I think it's a lack of supervision. The man that supervises that yard has an office there, but he's mainly in Rocky Mount. He's not there. He's not there when they do these things. And it's our word against theirs. The crews are unsupervised out there, and they pretty much do what they want. And just a few seem to have a grudge for us. And those are really impacting our quality of life. But I'd like to thank the commission and all the help we've got. And I hope one day I can come back here and say, y'all are not going to see me again. I'm through coming complaining. But I do thank y'all. I hope you have a wonderful
Appreciate
Christmas.
you coming up.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Who's next?
Next we have Brenda Brown.
Good afternoon. My name is Brenda Brown, and I stay out on 1861 Staten Mills Road. And I'm here again about that train. It's impossible to sleep with a train with 2 engines parked between houses. It's literally in my backyard. And it's just getting ridiculous. I mean, we don't know what to do. I called anybody that I could call to and let them hear exactly what I'm hearing. I have to leave it on their answer machine so they can hear what I have to say. But I guess the train override it. And Mr. Dillard, he called me back one time and he said that they have a crew that comes in at 11 o'clock at night to do the shuffling of the train. Well, if they're there 11 o'clock at night to do the shuffling of, at 11 o'clock at night to do the shuffling around of the train, why are they out there 10 o'clock starting or whenever they get ready? They're out there doing what they want to do and when they want to do it and how they want to do it. And we just can't get no sleep out there. There's no peace out in the country. It's just, you can't sleep. Every 2-3 hours you woke listening to a train rumbling, blowing whistles and stuff like that. It's just ridiculous. And I just want somebody to step in. Mr. Rose has been a good help to us. You know, he came out to see what was going on. And it was like the expressions that they got on their faces. They couldn't believe it, how close that train was to our homes.
Less than 25.
And the train divides our home. My home and Mr. Cradle.
Thanks for coming, and I wish we could give you more affirmative response, but evidently, we don't know what to do. We have tried to confront and listen to y'all and appreciate you keep coming back as a board in totality. But since the last appearance by these people, Madam Attorney, have we had any update or any communication that we can enlighten them about?
We have been in constant contact with various sources, and we have kept Ms. Brown and Mr. Cradle informed. James Rhodes and other staff members and I were just out there this past week as we continue to monitor their improvement. We have ongoing conversation with the railroad, ongoing conversation with the FRA, the Federal Railroad Administration. We've had conversation with the Safety Board, and we've had conversation with the Home Office in Florida, including their General Counsel, in our efforts to reach the top person in charge, the CEO. And so while I think we have made significant progress, maybe not significant, but we've made good progress on one issue, as Mr. Cradle has indicated, a new issue has cropped up, and we are remaining as aggressive as we can be to address that issue. And as they also know, we have begun to work diligently on the establishment or the consideration of the establishment of a quiet zone. And what all would entail, since the new issue relates more to train whistles than it does to idling trains, although idling trains are still an issue. We recognize that. It does not appear that a quiet zone is the most effective answer, since it will not be applicable in a night switching operation. But there have been numerous efforts. We continue to remain in contact. Unfortunately, we have not reached success on the second issue, but we will continue to work on it.
Appreciate that, and I knew you'd been doing that, but I knew you'd been communicating with them. Just wanted to apprise them of where we are and that we will continue to try to assist in the situation.
Commissioner.
Thank both of you for coming.
Commissioner Owen.
Yes.
Mrs. Brown's bedroom looks to be about 12 feet from the railroad track. Isn't that a serious safety violation for that family to be sleeping at? If that train jumps the track, they're in serious trouble. Isn't there something there that can wager into that? Now, I remember Mr. Cradle lived further back, but that railroad track, for me to Glenwell, that's how close that track is.
Well, that's good information. I'm sure Janice would incorporate that with what else she's trying to do, Mary. Okay, item number 1 under 10.
We have Laura Jett with the Middies Commission to give a report on the Pitt County Nursing Home Adult Care Community Advisory Committee appointment process.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to come tonight. I'm Laura Jett, and I'm with Middies Commission, Area Agency on Aging, and I'm your regional long-term care ombudsman. And I had 3 goals tonight. One, just to go over some changes to the appointment process of your Community Advisory Committee here in Pitt County. Some of the processes have changed due to new legislation. I have a few members of the committee here. We have their annual report, which we sent in, so just want to highlight a few key items there. And then I have some data just from the work that I do individually to share with you on how Pitt County has fared this year and just share some observations. So I sent in a letter that was sent to all county commissioners. It was dated December 1st, highlighting the changes of the appointment process. So in the past, the way that program would work is a citizen would apply and their name and information would be sent to me. I would screen that person for conflicts of interest, which would be if they worked for a facility or if their family member, immediate family member worked within a facility, or if they had an immediate family member living within a facility, or if they were an owner or had financial interest in a facility. So we're talking about long-term care facilities. Any of those things would be considered conflicts. And in the past, if they met that conflict of interest, they didn't have any conflicts, I would then send you a letter to recommend appointment. At that time, we would do a 15-hour training with them and join them in and give them assignments. So that was the old way. And then House Bill 248 was passed in July of this year. And so the state ombudsman had to make policy and procedure to bring us into compliance. So the new procedure would be the citizen would apply. Their name would be sent to me to screen for conflicts. But then I would, if they meet the qualifications, I would then train them those 15 hours. Upon completion of that, we submit a letter to the state ombudsman and let him know that they have completed that process. And he would be the one to then recommend appointment to you. So he would send a letter letting you know they've been certified. So that piece has changed just in the order of completion. The state ombudsman originally did not have a role in this. It was county commissioner based. And so that's one change. The other change is that if the member is appointed and then they do not make their visits or they're not coming to their meetings regularly, the state ombudsman would then choose to decertify that person. So he would be the one that would submit a letter to you asking to be taken off of the committee. So that's the main changes with the new legislation. So are there any questions on that process before I?
We got a lot of material which was presented here with good information, and this is a report only. Are there any questions by the board members at this time? Ann?
Yes, ma'am. The conflict of having a family member living in a facility is still
part of the conflict of interest?
Yes, ma'am. And that came from the federal statute that's been
Okay.
incorporated. Yes, ma'am. And
Thank
if,
you, ma'am.
if we had, in the past, we had two committees, an adult care home committee and a skilled nursing committee. If we had two separate ones, then if someone lived in a skilled nursing, they could still be on the adult care home. But just due to time constraints in Pitt County, we have a joint committee. So that makes it a little harder to find someone to serve when we're screening them out sometimes. So,
Any further questions? If not, thank you, ma'am.
all right.
All right,
Sorry, I had their report in there as
Oh,
well.
I'm sorry. Go
Sorry. The committee report is in there for their annual report. Our report runs from October 1st to September 30th, 2017. Walter Council is our chairman, and Mayor Glorstein Brown is here with us as well. She served on our committee a long time. Just a few highlights from the report we gave you. We do currently have 11 members on the committee. We had some issues with the new law coming into effect where we were not allowed to appoint for some time, but we now are able to do that. We have one person we've trained. We have one that we're training next week, and then we have one that I'll be screening here shortly. The problem we've had is for every one we train, we lose one, and so we're we're really needing to have about 4 or 5 new members. We have 20 facilities in Pitt County, and this is a working board that's actually going out and doing those quarterly visits. So it's really a lot of work for a volunteer to take on. So we just feel like we'd be better off to have at least 4 or 5 more members. With the committee work that they did this year, the committee did provide 32 visits in our facilities here with 197 personal visits with residents, one-on-one visits. They're there to be an ear and to let the administrator of that facility during exit know some observations they have. And they do send referrals to me when there are actual complaints so that I can go back in and be an advocate for that resident. Just some trends with our data this year. We did see about a 40% turnover in our administrators. So out of 20 facilities, 8 had turnover. Some of those had turnover twice in their administrator during the year. So that does impact some of the issues that residents have with quality of care as that transition takes place. We're looking for this year to be a little more stable. And then also in your report, you'll see some complaint trends. I just wanted to be able to highlight what the region has and then give you county-specific information. For the whole region, we had 142 complaints this year, and Pitt County had 50 of those. But when you look at the number of facilities we have, Pitt County has 44% of our facilities, so having 35% of the complaints is about equitable there. So, yes, ma'am.
Under what circumstances that you do not accept a person who files the paperwork to be appointed to the board, other than the reasons you just gave, that they have someone living in the facility or they have a financial interest? Because there was a young lady who was very interested in this that had neither, and she every so often calls. So is there any other reason? Is there an age factor?
No, ma'am. It's simply the conflicts of interest and then that they complete the training. Everyone that I've had so far, I've called back. I did have a few applications I've had to email with because they gave no phone numbers. And then we had 2 applicants that applied during that transition time. I contacted both as soon as it was lifted. And one of them, after several emails and phone calls, did not respond to my calls for training. So I was able to train the one. But I'd love to maybe get with you and find out who that individual is.
I would appreciate it.
And see if that's the same person.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is a very important board, and I think that looking at your chairman or the chairman council and other members, I've been involved in that, as you're well aware.
Yes, sir.
And I would submit that any recommendation that the committee has that you can bring forth names to us, we certainly would appreciate that, because taking care of our elderly is very, very critical.
Absolutely. Well, and like I say, I look forward to the fact we have a couple that are in the process of being trained now and being screened to kind of build that committee up, because we really do need more volunteers.
and especially in some of our outlying areas, because we do have a facility in Farmville, we have Grifton and Ayden, so we have some outlying facilities, so we need more members that live throughout the county. So,
Anything else?
no, sir.
Thank you for your presentation,
Thank you.
ma'am. All right, the tax collection report. If you've read your material, you note that it was 72%, and that's 2% higher than last year or last month, whenever. Is there any question about that?
Motion to
Can we
approve.
approve?
Second.
All in favor indicate by raising your right hand. All opposed? Thank you, sir. Okay, the Winterville election update.
Thank you for allowing me to update you on the situation we're dealing with Winterville. For your information, there's one copy for each of the commissioners, for the clerk, and for the attorney. When you received my last report in your packet from your last meeting, at that time we thought everything was settled and done. No one had filed an election protest, and according to the statutes, if 6 days after canvass and if an election protest has not been filed, you issue a certificate of election. So we followed that. But in the morning of December 6th, we received a call from the State Board of Elections instructing us that we could not issue a certificate of election because we were aware of the 10 ineligible voters, regardless of a protest not having been filed. And they instructed that the Board of Elections had to meet and request a new election and revoke the certification of Mr. Hines. So the board held an emergency meeting that afternoon at 4:30. They did that. We signed a letter that I drafted up for them. Next morning, received a call that evidently was too vague. You see it from the front page. First page is the initial letter. Second page is the addendum that we sent the second day. They wanted it specific, requesting a new election and revoking the certificate of election. So we did that. And essentially, at this point in time, we are waiting for the state board to file with Wake County Superior Court. The reason it's having to go there is no sitting state board. So when I'm talking about state board, I'm talking about the staff up there. We have no sitting state board body. So anything that comes from the county will go to the state board, and they're going to hand it to the Wake County Superior Court. And that's where we're waiting at this point. I emailed this afternoon to the legal team at the state board, did not get a reply as to the status of the filing with Superior Court. When I checked last Thursday, it had not been filed. They were working on a draft, as they said. So at this point, I wish I had more to tell you that the situation was closer to being resolved, but at this point, we're still in a holding pattern.
So you held an abeyance until you have the court action, is that correct?
Well, what we have to do is it's just for that one contest, the unexpired term. So the mayor and the two other council seats, they should have been sworn in, I believe, on the 11th. It's just this unexpired term. And currently, the incumbent, according to what the state board is telling us, since we could not certify a winner in this, the incumbent will hold over until the situation is resolved.
Any questions?
I have a comment.
All right.
Yes, Mr. Davis, this does highlight the dangers of out-of-precinct voting, does it not?
Well, this was not necessarily out of precinct because we had, of these 10, 4 voted early, 6 voted election day. And really what it is down to a coding issue. It's human error where the code for Winterville and I was entered into the municipality code rather than leaving it blank. So these voters, some of them have actually been contacted and spoken with. They were under the impression they were Winterville residents. So that it's the tough thing with this is we're really entering from several attorneys that we've talked with that are involved, and then just attorneys that we know. This is a total gray area, essentially because there is no sitting state board. When you look at it, as I mentioned about the certificate of election, issue 6 days after canvass, if there's no election protest, well, we didn't have an election protest, but there's these ineligible voters that we're aware of. And we were ready to deal, or the board was ready to deal with a protest, but no one filed one. And without instruction from the state board, we followed the statute and issued certificate.
That answer your question, Sean? Mm-hmm. All right, any further questions? If not, we appreciate it, Mr. Davis.
Thank
You, sir. Mr. Manager?
Yes, quickly on my manager's report, item number 4, the next meeting dates in the month of January, you'll have one regular meeting on January the 8th. Then, as previously mentioned, you'll have your CIP workshop on January 22nd, starting at 8:30 in the morning, which is a CIP and budget planning workshop. We have nailed down the date on item B with the Pitt Community College Board of Trustees. That will be on February 21st at from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. That will consist of first a campus bus tour to give you a better orientation to their new facilities on the campus as well as existing campus, lunch, and then a presentation by I believe Dr. Massey after that. Item C on the 911 Backup Center. As the board is aware, we've had a $1.8 million backup center in the CIP, in the budget planning, that has been in the course of being implemented. I'm happy to report that that project is fully implemented and complete. We actually transitioned from the 911 center here in this building over to the Technology Enterprise Center on Green Street, and successfully operated out of there for 3 or 4 days, and then came back to this building. So that project is done, complete, operational. We're still talking with the city of Greenville, who also desires to have a duplicate backup center for their operations in the same space. So we're in talks with them on that. Item D on the radio and paging update. Last time I reported to you, we were in the middle of testing with Motorola and Federal Engineering, who were assisting them. Testing has been completed. We have the reports in hand. We're reviewing those reports. Testing went very well. We're going to have a full report for you on January the 8th to tell you everything remaining that needs to be done in the system and any matters as such. There were a couple hiccups that we had in testing, nothing major. The system overall is very successful. We'll need to address 1 or 2 things, and we'll explain that to you on the 8th. Otherwise, just 2 other things real quick. I'll call this item E. Lee Guth with Corporate Extension asked me to announce that they're applying for a $4,000 Food Council Capacity Grant through the Food Community Strategies. They're using a $1,000 match through I think, Vidant Health. And then the other thing I have is just a quick note about our opioid forum that Pitt County held in conjunction with Vidant Health, with Trillium Resources, with Pitt County Coalition on Substance Abuse, Health Department, Sheriff's Office, and hope I didn't leave anybody out. But that was held on Tuesday, December the 5th. We had over 140 people in attendance. We had 8 different providers there who had tables set up providing resources for folks who needed information, help, resources on the issue, and just had a very good showing. That went from 6 p.m. to 8, a little over 8. That's all I have.
Very good. Any questions of Mr. Elliott? If not, how about the consent agenda?
I move for acceptance of consent.
Second.
Motion made and second. All in favor indicate by raising your right hand. All opposed, like. All right, number 12. Item for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Jordan Smith, Assistant County Attorney, here to speak on this next item on the agenda. This item was placed on the agenda at the request of Commissioner Farley. Commissioner Farley is interested in the county enacting a drone ordinance. I don't know if your monitor's up, but I have 2 photos of drones on the monitor to give you an illustration of what we're talking about. Commissioner Farley convened a working group of various county officials to explore this topic. I served in that working group to research the law to see to what extent, if any, local governments could regulate drones. To kind of give you a short synopsis of that, this is kind of an emerging technology. The law around it's somewhat still evolving. It is a form of aviation, which historically is regulated by the federal government through the Federal Aviation Administration. The FAA has enacted drone rules and regulations, but at the same time have acknowledged that there's a limited role for local governments to be involved in regulating drones. To that end, enclosed in your materials on page 115 is a model ordinance that was prepared by a group in California for California cities to regulate drones. This ordinance on page 115 has been reviewed by the FAA. They believe it does not interfere with any federal government regulations, that it does not encroach on their turf, so to speak. So if Pitt County were inclined to regulate drones, I would recommend that it closely resemble this ordinance in substance. And just, I would like to point out two things. If this board was so inclined to adopt a drone ordinance, it would only apply in the unincorporated areas of Pitt County outside the municipal limits. And there has been some talk about the airport, and the airport, for the most part, falls within the city limits of Greenville. So I just wanted to point that out. And I'm here tonight just seeking some direction from the full board as to whether or not this is an item you would like to see brought back in a form tailored to Pitt County, in a Pitt County ordinance for your consideration at a future date. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you may have. If you have any questions about the need for this ordinance, I would defer to Commissioner Farley. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions about the legal process.
I'm not gonna talk to you. Charles?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jordan Smith has done a really exemplary job on this, and I was made aware of this when I went to the NACO committee meeting in transportation and aviation in Columbus, Ohio this summer, and we were quite shocked to have a sudden meeting called with just as members of that committee with the people from the FAA and some contracted experts on drones and such. And once we got the shock that the FAA was actually outreaching to us for some help in the minor end of this pervading nuisance, which is only going to get worse, I saw that we really needed to do something about this. I looked around at the experts in our midst. We had P.J. Andrews in Soil and Water, who is a drone pilot and has operated a drone researching bad areas causing flooding and stuff. And for the law enforcement input, which of course would be needed, Sheriff Elks sent Randy Gentry, and he has been just a font of information from the law enforcement. And of course, John Banks, former chairman of the Airport Authority, knows more about the subject, and he was the one with the strongest comments on why this is necessary and we should act to be proactive. And I'd like to commend them that all these members are here tonight to show support, answer questions you might have. Jordan's basically asking, should we go forward with this? And he can formulate it to fit in Pitt County. And as he said, it doesn't conflict with anything. The FAA is not telling us to do this. They're, in effect, encouraging us. So the biggest question is, what type of enforcement? Will it be civil penalties, slap on the wrist, or a felony? The law enforcement seems to think the felony is easier to apply, but that's the real question in front of the commissioners on this. But I believe truly it would be unwise and unprudent to not go forward with this. We've got this team that's working on it and is enthusiastic about doing something that needs to be done, and that's my piece.
Charles, the enclosure that we've got here on page 120, 118, and the others, that is from another place. Is that from Orange County, California, or where?
It's a trade, a municipal advocacy group from Orange County, California, much like the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners. But so yes.
If I understand what you're saying, Charles, is that you want a ordinance drafted by the county attorney to propose to the board? Is that what you're saying?
I think that would be meet, right, and fruitful to move in that direction at this point, Mr. Chairman.
That's the last sentence on page 116, which is, if the board desires, well, everybody can read. What's the pleasure of the board on this?
I make a motion that we go ahead and pursue it.
I have a
I'll
question.
second.
Yes, ma'am. Have I got a second?
I'll second it. See.
We've got a motion made and second, now discussion then.
Well, I just sense drones, well, the use of them, the flying of them. Are you concerned about interference with, the airport, you know, with
So, John Banks from the airport served on the working group that Commissioner Farley convened, and I think it's fair to say that that was a concern of Mr. Banks and the airport.
Ma'am, my question is, since the airport is not in our jurisdiction, right?
It is jointly owned by the county and the city. It's a gray area.
But it would not be, the airport is within the city limits of Greenville, so this, or any ordinance this board adopts would not affect the city of
Would not
Greenville.
affect. Okay, so that's why I'm wondering, why would we want to, have an ordinance that it really doesn't do anything?
Really doesn't do anything. These
I'm
drones,
just asking.
yeah, they can be very, very dangerous in the hands of people, children, and things like that. If you remember the airliner that landed in the Hudson, that was because of a bird strike. Look at the size of these drones. Near misses have happened with aircraft all the time. This is a limited ordinance, but it's what we can do right now, and it primarily focuses on taking off and landing. As far as danger to the airport, well, with the landing systems and the rules already in place by the FAA, that is patently illegal to mess with an aircraft while it's on approach.
But if you read the body of the text here, it specifically goes into some of the things that can be hazardous. Drones can be weaponized. Drones can be, and they don't have to be around an airport to be weaponized. So it could affect the city, it could affect the county, it could affect anybody in the county. And so this is saying you can't take one off out of sight. In other words, can't be 2 miles away and you're controlling a drone that's doing something somewhere else. You've got to be close to it. So I just think it's a good idea that we get ahead of the curve rather than be behind it.
Thanks, Tom. Ann, had you finished?
How would you, enforce it?
This is the question that needs.
That would be part of the ordinance,
The board,
and if they
yeah.
bring it back for us to review, I think.
Mhm.
Beth, then Melvin, then Jimmy.
This to me is one thing that right now, to me, doesn't seem to be that big a problem for us. I know that it can be, but there hasn't been anything that I've known of within the county. And I know there are most of the regulations relative to drones are through the FAA, right? As far as the airport's concerned and that sort of thing. And, I mean, who's going to police it? And how are we going to enforce it? And I heard the comment that there was a recommendation that it be a felony. Was that what I heard? What did I hear?
I'm
What
sorry,
was the word that was used?
What needs clarification?
So I think Commissioner Farley misspoke. So there was a question about whether it'd be a civil penalty or a criminal penalty.
Right.
The criminal penalty would be a misdemeanor, not a felony.
Okay.
But there's
that
the
was what
question.
I heard.
Thank you
and-
for correcting me.
There's the
Yeah,
question
that
about.
was what I heard, and I thought, there are a lot of, anyway, to me, it's an issue that, right now, I don't think that we have that big a problem in Pitt County. We have a lot of problems with a lot of things, but I'm not sure that this is one of them that, we need to establish an ordinance on it this time, and that's how I feel about it. Thank you.
All right, Melvin, then Jimmy.
Yeah, my concern is certainly local government getting involved into this. I think we're treading a very thin line when you talk about federal government and congressional action. I just want to. I think it's an idea well taken, Commissioner Fowler, but I think that we'll be treading into an area that would certainly cause some situation and maybe some backlash from federal government. I would rather personally see that in the hands of the Federal Aviation Commission and get some recommendation from them in terms of some local ordinance. I did receive a legal text message from a gentleman out of Raleigh with the Federal Aviation Committee, and he was certainly opposing this. I think Raleigh had a situation sometime earlier that they did not act upon this because of some of the things I'm just mentioning. I just would like to know legally from the legal staff, and maybe you and Janice could kind of tell us what you think in terms of we're doing, or we doing something that would backlash on us, or what?
So legally, when I began to research this topic, there were some true concerns about federal preemption and encroaching upon the federal government's territory, so to speak. I encountered this ordinance that truly only regulates landing and taking off, and has been reviewed and vetted to some extent by the FAA. I spoke to a FAA attorney from the Atlanta office. He had two very minor concerns with this model ordinance that I think could be addressed, but otherwise they were fine with it. But there are, like I said, the law in this area is still somewhat evolving. As it stands today, I think this ordinance steers clear of any federal preemption issues.
Wait a minute.
Okay,
Jimmy?
Well, my question is, number one, I'm not totally comfortable with acting on this now because I just don't think we have enough information. The second concern is if we need a drone ordinance for the unincorporated parts of the county, it would surely appear to me that we would need one for the incorporated parts of the county. The cities are much more heavily populated than the unincorporated areas, and looks to me like if we need an ordinance, it should be a joint ordinance with the county and the municipalities.
Thank you, Mr. Garrish. Beth, then Glenn.
Well, so this ordinance, and I did read it, and you know I'm not in the legalese a lot, but what you said is, so what does it say about taking off and landing? I mean, in your words.
So it regulates a number of things as far as where a person can be when they take off or land the drone. And that's because local governments have the authority to regulate land use.
Yes.
And takeoff and landing is literally a land use because the drone is on the ground. Once it gets up in the air, I'm of the opinion that it's the federal government's jurisdiction and something. So if we wanted to regulate, you can't operate more than just make up 200 feet in the air, I think that would be preempted. But this just regulates landing and taking off in a number of different circumstances.
Like in a backyard, away from so many buildings for so many feet? Or
You can't land or take off within so many feet of a public building. You can't land or take off on land that's not yours without the permission of the landowner. You can't land or take off outside the person's visual line of sight. Can't land or take off within 25 feet of another individual unless that individual consents to it. So those are just some examples.
Mary.
From my personal experience being in the airport area for a lifetime, recreation and sport issue can be a problem for this airport, because if you look at Highway 33 West that was cut off by the extension of the runway, if you have a good baseball game and a good hitter can knock a ball right into the engine of a plane. And my thing is, if you're looking at recreation and leisure and runway, you're getting into, if we look at the drone, this all is some of the same. And if you're talking about civil punishment, felony, or whatever, you're going to cut out simple play from some people or the change of it. I would suggest in this, and I'm not ready to vote on this because I do see it as a safety issue. I want you to know that it is a safety factor because at some point a good pitcher can throw a ball into the engine of a plane when it comes down to the north end of that runway in that cul-de-sac. So there are problems with the runway and the airport as it relates to location. That's why, but I'm not ready to vote on it. And I suggest if you would wanting to know where I am, turn by the old, where I'm talking about, the old prison camp. Turn west on 33 at the old prison camp and go to that cul-de-sac and see where that plane stops to rail up the engine, and you'll know the problem of safety that I'm talking about.
Tom.
It's amazing that I'm hearing, oh, it's not a big problem now, although it's anticipatable. How many times have we heard on the news where the dots weren't connected and government didn't take action and it was foreseeable? This is one of those things. These things pose a danger. There are private airstrips out there. Maybe the ordinance needs to be adjusted in such a way that it protects a private airfield. To me, to not do something and, like I said earlier, be ahead of the curve just does not make sense.
Well, this is from, I didn't ever get you to, how about nine? Sure.
I've just got a brief comment, Mr. Chairman. I think we've gotten a little deep in the weeds on this. The vote tonight is just a procedural vote to have Jordan bring us something back, and that gives us a time frame between now and January where we can each submit ideas or concerns to Jordan to help him with the crafting of this. All we have here is just a go-by. That's just a kind of a boilerplate ordinance that they've gotten from another organization. It's not something that if we voted yes tonight would go into our code of ordinances. It would just merely instruct Jordan to come back to us with another ordinance that then we can then vote up or down.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Everybody talked all they want to tonight?
Well, you're talking about only up and down as far as the drone's concerned, right? Where?
Just landing and takeoff.
Right, the up and the down. And
All
where
right.
you do that.
Yes, ma'am.
All in favor of the motion indicate by raising your right hand.
Now, wait a minute, can I ask a question? When you say when we're voting, what, I want to understand what.
For him to bring a proposed ordinance back is what Glenn was projecting. I think that's what Tom's motion
That
was.
was it.
Okay.
Not that you're voting on the motion itself. Where
But
you
to
gonna have?
bring something back.
Yes.
All right.
All
May
right.
may I ask one more question before we vote? Did anyone have any value for my idea about incorporating the city into this? Or don't think that is important?
I think that's important, and I think when we do this, the city will follow by either joining it or drafting one of their own.
Well, let's let them
Okay.
join in. I mean, I like your idea, Jimmy.
I thought it'd be better to have just one ordinance rather than one for the unincorporated area of the county, one for Farmville, one for Grifton, one for Aden, one for Winterville, and one for Greenville.
Janice, can a city and a county have a joint?
So you're not fundamentally opposed to it?
No.
No.
Yes, so the way we would typically do it in the past is a county ordinance can be applicable within a municipal limit if that municipality adopts it by resolution.
Okay.
And so it would just be a matter of conversation and coordination at the front end so that if you wanted it applicable in both your unincorporated portions and your municipalities, that they would have that feedback before you adopted.
Can you?
And Mr. Chairman, I want to just note that any other cities or counties that has adopted this ordinance in the state of North Carolina, so that we can have some idea as to what's going on with that, if any.
So through my research, I tried to find the answer to that question. can't say this is definitively correct, but I know of no county in North Carolina that has a drone ordinance, and I only know of one municipality that has a drone ordinance, and that's a relatively small town called McAdensville, and they prohibit drone flight totally in the month of December.
That's because of
All right.
Christmas
Mr.
decorations.
Chairman.
Has everybody talked enough?
No, I have not.
I'll try it again then.
I'm concerned, I understand the point that you could vote to instruct him to bring back information, then we vote it down, up. But I'm concerned about staff spending the time to do this. And that we really still have some concerns about whether or not we need it or whether we should do it at this particular time. So all the time and money that staff is going to spend developing this ordinance that nobody else in North Carolina has one other than that one small municipality. So that is a concern of mine where I am opposed to the ordinance at this particular time, but yet we're going to spend money to develop an ordinance. That's my concern.
Thank you, ma'am. Anybody else want to speak now?
I just want to call the question, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All in favor of the motion made by Tom, second by Glenn, I believe, wasn't it, Glenn? Indicate that's to bring a proposal back to us. All in favor of that motion, indicate by raising your right hand. What you got?
That passes, 6
All
to
right, all opposed, like sign. Okay? All right, let's see now, Mr. Manager, we're down for items for decision.
Yes, sir. The first item is the budget amendment contract for the detention center. We have Tim Corley up on this item.
Good evening, Chairman, members of the board. This is the second phase of the HVAC project that you probably recall at the detention center. The first phase was completed earlier this year. And because of federal inmate revenue projections and where we're at right now, the sheriff has requested that we use these funds for the second phase of the HVAC improvements at the detention center. The low bidder was Kearney and Associates, who also performed the work on the first phase, and the control part of the contract is done by Brady, it is Brady Controls at the detention center, so they're included as well. There's also a small, I think $4,000 or $5,000 cost within here, which was added, which is for humidity controls. As you know, we've had humidity issues at the detention center, and this is to control those humidity problems that are occurring there. So we would like to have the budget amendment approved and the contract approved for $296,893. We're asking for approval this evening for the manager to sign those contracts.
One question, you said you had, the low bid was $262,300, is that what you said?
Yeah, that was
bids
for
did you
the
have on
main
that?
HVAC control units. That was the low bid from Kearney and Associates.
How many bids did you have on that?
We had 3 bids.
How about on the controls? How many bids you have
The
on
controls have to be Brady Controls.
Didn't
They're
ask
sole
you that.
source. I'm sorry?
You said you don't have to, but you didn't have but one, is that correct?
Yes, because we are under, Brady controls all of the detention center, their controls.
Wouldn't it be normal to bid both of them together?
We would just, if we asked Kearney to do that, they would just put a markup on Brady's
So you
bid.
think this is a cheaper way here?
Oh, yes, certainly, yes, by far,
All right,
yes.
Thank you. We got a motion for
I
approval
move
of this.
that we accept this recommendation.
Second it.
Any discussion now? All in favor indicate by raising your right hand. All opposed? So ordered. Thank you, sir. All right, number 2.
2 is Raymond Revilla for the order of collection of taxes. Since he is now the appointed tax collector, this transfers the order collection from Kathy Booker to Mr. Revilla.
Do we have a motion approved?
Motion to approve.
Second it.
All in favor indicate by raising your right hand. All opposed? So ordered. All right, how about the number 3 there?
Number 3, we have a report regarding the animal shelter expansion and renovation. Tim Corley is going to give a quick report on this as to what we're seeking the board's permission to bid the expansion and renovation of this project out. So before you, you have a PowerPoint that he's going to go over. He also has a rendering of the actual facility he's putting on the tripod that's before you as well.
So good evening again. So we are here tonight to give you an update on our animal shelter expansion project. Shelterplanners.com, who's our architect on the project, has pretty much completed design plans. The design plans are complete. The site plan is complete, working on a couple small issues with the city of Greenville on getting our site plan finally approved. Our schedule right now is if the board approves tonight to move forward with bidding the project, we will move forward with bidding and hopefully bid that in January. With construction starting February, March. We'll come back to you with the bids, with all the pricing, and I'll go over those in a second, but we'll provide those bids for you so you can decide how you like to move forward. We will come back with our recommendation based on how the bids come out. Construction is about a year. That's what our architect is telling us it's about going to take. So sometime near the start of 2019, we're hoping that construction is complete. So this is a spreadsheet of the costs. We just finalized these late last week. Our architect was finalizing numbers for us. If you'll look at these numbers, you'll see the initial costs, which were identified in April of 2014. That's when the initial study was done by our architect, and that was when there was a $1.8 million budget that was set by the board for us to move forward with. Since then, as you know, we're 3.5 years later, and so you see the revised costs, and some of these costs are the same because there were costs that were already known. For instance, the design costs. However, some of the costs have risen. As you know, that's not only because of the economy and the cost of construction, but also just how the project has evolved. You'll notice two important items on this list: the alternates and contingencies. So the total price initially from our architect was $1.56 to $1.78. That has now risen to $2.0 to $2.25 million. That does include alternates and contingencies. Again, this is an estimate from our architect. The alternates, there's actually 10 or 11 alternates which will be bid on the project, and we will, based on the pricing that we get once bid, we will determine. We'll basically have a menu of items based on the base bid, which will include the main construction. We'll have items that we could choose from if there are funds that are available. And then the contingencies, of course, is any unknowns that we perceive on the project, and those numbers, that $140,000 to $160,000, is a number that's being recommended by our design team. So that's where we are at this point. I do want to update you. Just this was the initial conceptual design that our architect had provided. I know it's kind of hard to read any of the things, but that's the general layout. The expansion would be to the north there on the right-hand side of the page, and then the existing office space and kennel area would also be renovated. This is the actual floor plan from our actual designer, which indicates all the different rooms and space designations for the project. And then this is our site plan. I wanted to kind of give you an overall view. Again, as we stated, I think at a prior meeting, our site design includes a standalone entrance and exit for this facility. So the convenience site and the animal shelter can operate interdependently, which they do not do now. Now you have to travel through the convenience site to get to the shelter. So there is some work along County Home Road that has to be done as far as turn lane extension. There we have to reroute the ditch that goes there through the property for those that know the property, and so there are some expenses there. We do feel that if we bid it, we obviously will come back to you with our recommendation and how to move forward. We won't truly know the pricing until we bid the project, but our hope is that it will fit within the budget that's been designated. So tonight we'd just like approval to move forward with bidding the project.
It's a pleasure to board with.
I'd like to move that they move forward.
Second.
Any further discussion? Not, all in favor indicate by raising your right hand. All opposed? So ordered. The Grifton, agreement.
Motion to approve it.
Say anything,
Is there a second to that motion? Is there a second to Mr. Gass?
Second it.
All right, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Like sign. She did a good job tonight, didn't she? All right, James, you on number 5?
Yes, sir. You know, we started this Woodmore street improvement project quite a long time ago. Janice and I have been meeting with some of the property owners probably 4 or 5 years now. We started formally with the process. Remember, this is all laid out in the general statutes. About a year ago, you allowed the engineering department to go out for bids earlier this year. And just to bring you up to date, that's kind of what we started out with on the screen right now. This subdivision street was in dire need of repair. It had not been taken over by DOT for any improvements or for long-term maintenance. So you can see we had a bunch of people involved. DOT was instrumental in getting this done. So after the contract was let, you can see the equipment on site. Certainly a lot of drainage improvements went along with the road bed improvement as well. Cut out several sections that needed to have total repair. And this is kind of what we ended up with, including some new driveways as well as certainly seeding to ensure that there was no sediment leaving the site and a nice blacktop on top. So what does all this mean? We have finally got the petition process completed through the State Board of Transportation just a couple of weeks ago on December the 7th. The Board of Transportation acted on accepting this particular road, Woodmore Drive, along with a portion of Trails into the state system for perpetual maintenance. So that's been taken care of. So now we're finally at a point to finalize the process. And in your package tonight, you have a resolution that speaks to the total amount that was spent on this project. The board has put forward that money. With that, this is a loan of sorts. We're looking for repayments. We've spoken about that. It would be a 10-year term. The total amount that was spent was a little bit over $106,000. 21 property owners involved. What this amounts to, and you'll see it in your package, is an annual payment per property owner of a little over $500 per year. So to handle the remainder of this process, tonight we're asking for your approval of the preliminary assessment roll resolution and setting the public hearing date of January 8th to complete this assessment and move forward or finalize that assessment roll. And,
Pleasure to board.
Move to approve.
Second.
All right. All in favor indicate by raising your right hand. All opposed like. Thank you, James.
And
Leave
one
you
other
up
item,
again.
Mr. Chairman, is the county has been fortunate enough to receive a $1 million grant through the state, the Disaster Recovery Act. You'll see the budget amendment included in your package tonight, and this is primarily set aside for housing programs and specifically the rehab of some of the homes that were damaged during the flood. We'd ask for your permission to sign that grant agreement and to approve the budget amendment that's included in your package.
Move approved.
Second. All in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed? Carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Scott, Development Commission.
Yes, on the Development Commission, you have reappointments as listed in the agenda for 3 existing members. They're being recommended for reappointment: Randy Walters, Mike McCarthy, and Tom Gold. Actually, 4: Tom Gold and Stacy Gaskins.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second. All in favor indicate by raising your right hand. All opposed like. So ordered. Okay,
Jim is still on the.
Local Fireman's Refund Board.
Yes, on page
Do we
1.
have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor indicate by raising your right hand. Like sign, so ordered. Appointment, reappointment to the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council.
So moved for the appointment and reappointments.
Is there a second?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
I do have one concern with, one member on on there with the attendance of that member on the juvenile. So I don't know if we need to let that person know that they have not been attending and the meetings, and maybe they need to send somebody else.
We've got a motion made and seconded. What is the pleasure of the person that made the motion and the second?
Well, I serve on that board. I'd like to, would like this, the chairman recommendation on that. I think he recommended those that's up here. So I
So
certainly.
you stand by your
I
motion?
stand by that motion.
Now, who made the second?
You don't need a second for a motion.
No.
You don't need a second.
Didn't
All
have a
right,
second.
I think what she was saying.
You don't need one for
Have you got anything else, Ann, you want to say about it?
Well, maybe, let's send a letter to, what's his name?
I believe that's done a lot. Kimberly, and normally when a attendance issue arises, doesn't a letter come from you or somebody?
Typically, if the chair asks us to do it of
All
that
right,
board.
chair did not in this case,
The
as
chair of
Melvin
the
said.
board, yeah, has to
All
ask.
right.
And maybe the chair of the board could speak to the person.
Solve
Maybe
your
Melvin,
problem,
you
man.
could check on that.
I'm not saying, I think we need to call attention to his attendance record. Yeah.
All in favor, indicate by raising your right hand.
Referring to this, he's only been there 3 hours.
All right, County Board of Adjustment, what's the feeling of the board?
That is a point.
Who you got on that, 240?
We have two
Make a motion, we
reappointments. I move
reappoint
for the
Joe
two
Whitaker and Lee Ball.
reappointments.
All right.
Second it.
Okay, all in favor indicate by raising your right hand. All opposed? Ordered. Okay.
We have two that,
What?
that need to be replaced, that will be alternate seats, is that correct? The two seats, they're alternate seat, will become alternate seats. I've gone through the, applications, and I only saw one that I know of that knows a lot about the county, and unless we can get some information from you, Mr. Rhodes, about somebody that you feel strongly about.
Prefer not to make a
I know you do.
recommendation, but what I would suggest in this case, we do have two alternates that have been trained. I would recommend we move them up into the regular seats.
Just did that.
Okay, didn't we do that?
No, we
Okay.
reappointed two people.
Oh, okay,
So we need to move the two alternates up into permanent seats and then determine who you'd like to appoint to the alternate seats.
Okay.
I would like to have those 5 seated members, and then we can deal with the two alternates.
Who are the two alternates?
who are the two alternates?
They are Miss Faye Barefoot and, I don't have my paper with me.
Lee Ball.
Lee Ball.
Is that, here's your, is that right?
Since it's not in the package for the day,
Yeah,
I
let's-
recommend that,
Let's wait on that. till
come
the
back on
next
both
one.
of those. What's the board's feeling about that?
We agree.
I feel that way, because I wasn't even aware
I
of this
support the
part.
chairman.
All right. Okay, what else then?
Does
Commissioners'
that present
comments?
an issue with you, Jan?
If we have an item for consideration, I can just move the two alternates up
Yes,
for the time
Yeah.
being.
you can do that anyway, I would think.
You know how to handle it.
I can handle that one.
The two alternates' names are here, Lee Ball and Bessie Barefoot.
And I make a motion, we move both of those up.
I second it.
Second.
All right, all in favor indicate by raising your right hand. All opposed, so ordered. Ann, you up first.
Just, Merry Christmas to everybody.
Merry
Ma'am?
Christmas.
Oh, good. Two Merry Christmas.
Yeah,
Charles,
Happy New Year.
Lynn,
Merry Christmas as well.
Beth,
Have a Merry Christmas, everybody, and be safe.
Mary,
Season greetings. Be safe, everyone. Bless
Tom.
you.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year's.
Merry Christmas. I want to recognize the girls team.
I want to
girls
thank
team.
everybody for your patience tonight and for your bearing with me for my not being patient. But repetitious sometimes is an enemy instead of being a friend. that's what promulgated my attitude about that, if you want an explanation. But having that said, everybody have a Merry Christmas.
move
and
for
God bless you.
adjournment.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
aren't you supposed to be wishing somebody a happy birthday?
I'm trying to get to it,
You
man.
better do it right here in the public, and maybe you can get there.
I
We
might
got
can't
to-
get in that
We
day.
got to vote on the
She gonna
adjournment.
lock you out the
We got
house.
'em.
All in favor of adjourning? Thank you. Yep. What's got?
I'm calling.